Hello and welcome everyone to this webinar on system supports for effective large-scale reading interventions. I'm Alice Cornish and I am going to be moderating today's session. I'm a director at Better Purpose and have been working with RTI International throughout this series of webinars. And I think some of you may know that this is actually the third and final webinar in our series of 3 exploring findings from the Learning at Scale study. And for those of us who have been with us on this journey over the last few months, you'll know that together we have explored the instructional practices, instructional supports, and now the system supports that were most commonly observed across 8 successful large-scale reading programs. I had a quick look at registrations yesterday, and of everyone registered for today's event, over half had attended a previous webinar in our series, and more than a third had actually attended both previous webinars. So a big thank you to those of you who've come along with us over the last few months. We really hope that these webinars have been really useful to you. So the short video that we just played summarizes some of the key findings from the brief that we're going to be talking about today. The video has actually been shared on Twitter from the Better Purpose account, so do look out for that, retweet and share with your networks. Just a little bit about the study itself that we're going to be talking about. The Learning at Scale research is being led by RTI International and is part of the Centre for Global Development Education Research Consortium funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It explores the characteristics of 8 programs which have been effective at improving reading outcomes at scale. 3 of the programs you're going to be hearing more from today. All of the briefs and the interim Learning at Scale study report are available through the bit.ly link on the bottom of your screens. If you are so inclined, you can also access it through the QR code that's going to remain on your screen throughout today's session. If you haven't had a chance already, do check out all 3 briefs. They build on each other and complement each other really nicely, and there's loads of great insights in those briefs for you to take a look at. So we have about an hour and 45 minutes today. I hope you're sitting comfortably. In that time, we're going to be starting off by going through the key findings of the brief with 2 of the authors, Joseph DeStefano and Dr. Bidemi Carroll from RTI International. We're then going to have a quick reflection break where we will encourage you to share some of your reflections from hearing the findings. And then we're going to be bringing to life those findings by diving into some of the insights from 3 of the programs featured in the study. And the programs that we're going to be hearing from are the Pakistan Reading Project implemented by IRC, Kenya's Tusome Early Grade Reading Activity implemented by RTI, and Partnership for Education Learning in Ghana implemented by FHI 360. All of our speakers will be sharing their perspectives and insights on the system support that made the biggest difference in those programs. Following this, all of our speakers, including the authors, will be joining a panel for questions and answers. So get ready with all of your questions. That will be a really interactive, great opportunity to hear more from them. And then to close, we're going to be passing to Dr. Asya Kazmi from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who will share some final words to wrap up our webinar series. A few boring housekeeping points. Please do direct your questions for speakers through the Q&A channel on your screens and not through the chat. We will seek to answer all the questions that come through the Q&A either live on the panel or written responses through that channel. You can keep the chat for your own reflections, your comments, but not for questions, because otherwise we might miss these. Please also do introduce yourselves if you haven't already, so that we know who's in the room with us today. You'll notice that the session's being recorded, and we will be sharing out a link after the session. So look out for that. Do share with others that you think might find this session useful as well. And we'd love some good engagement with the study on social media. I mentioned before that we've shared that short video. If you're on Twitter, please do follow the live tweeting that we're going to be doing for today's event. The live tweeting is going to be led from the Better Purpose account, so that's at better_purpose. So follow that account and do use the hashtag Learning at Scale to share your reflections. Retweet, like, tag us so that we can amplify this work and the work that you're all doing on Learning at Scale. Finally, we would love feedback on these briefs. So if you've already read today's brief, we really want to hear what you think. You'll see on the screen here a link to a very, very short survey where you can share your views on the brief. So if you have had the chance to take a look at it, please do follow that link. I think it's probably coming through the chat as well. Share your thoughts with us. And if you're going to be reading the brief after this session, again, please do use that link to share your thoughts with us. I think that's enough from me. I'm delighted to hand over to Joseph De Stefano and Dr. Bidemi Carroll, who are going to talk you through the key findings shared in the brief. Joseph is the Director for Policy, Systems and Governance at RTI International and has 30 years of experience in K-12 education. In his current role, he's leading RTI's work on supporting education system reforms related to the policies, strategies and management capacities necessary to improve learning outcomes on a large scale. Dr. Carroll is joining Joseph today. She's a senior research education manager and an expert in international education who has worked on projects across sub-Saharan Africa, as well as conducting research for this Learning at Scale study. She's also the project manager for the Malawi Early Grade Reading Improvement Activity and provides technical assistance to many other education efforts. It's really great to have both Joseph and Bidemi here, and I'm really pleased to hand over to Bidemi, who I think is going to introduce us, and Joseph, who's going to talk us through the key findings.
Thank you very much, Alice. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's great to see so many people logged on from all over the world. As Alice mentioned, I will briefly give a brief introduction to the study, and then Joe will take over and talk about the key findings and some of the implications. Thank you. So the question that we were trying to address with this particular brief was what system supports are required to deliver effective training and support to teachers and to promote effective classroom practices. Basically, we're trying to understand how the government, through its policies, its resources, its staff, etc., how they support these programs that have been shown to deliver learning at scale. As part of the study, we selected programs, 8 programs from around low and middle income countries. These are programs that went through a very tough selection criteria and came up tough. Basically, we were looking at programs that through impact evaluations showed effectiveness in terms of improving reading. And we also wanted programs that were being implemented in at least 2 administrative divisions in a country, in almost all of the schools. And also another selection criteria were programs that were still active, because we did want to go in and actually do some observations ourselves. And these 8 programs from Senegal, Ghana, Nigeria, Tanzania, Kenya, Pakistan, and India were selected because they were the most effective of the lot based on the criteria that we set up. And later on, we will be hearing from some of them delving into a bit more about their projects. The findings for this brief came from 2 main sources of data. The first one was in-depth examination of the implementation approaches, and also looking at program data that we collected from all 8 programs. So these were mainly based on questionnaires that program staff filled out. And then we also looked at, did in-country primary data collection for 4 of the 8 programs. Unfortunately, like most of our projects, we got thrown off by COVID-19. We had planned on interviewing and visiting all of these countries by by the end of 2020, but because of COVID-19, we could only visit 4 of these before that time frame. And so those 4 are the ones for which we will be presenting primary data for. So I'll now hand it over to Joe to talk about some of our key findings.
Thanks, Bidemi. Can folks hear me? Am I Okay, thanks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks everyone for taking the time to join us today. So I'll pick up from where Bidemi left off, so that we can have plenty of time to hear from the detailed presentations from 3 of the programs, as well as some time for discussion. So I want to talk about the key findings in a few different ways. The thing that stood out is that a key aspect of all of these programs was that they were designed to support and align with the existing systems, and that's since we were looking for programs that were implemented at scale. The way to achieve scale is to really work in support of the existing government systems and to improve the way in which they support implementation. And I'll speak specifically to some of the dimensions of that. Moving on to the essential characteristics that came out of this. So programs were helped make clear the priorities for instructional change, right? So all education systems in their sector plans and sector policies will state, that they want to improve learning, but then that has to get translated into something more specific. And the programs were good at focusing in on the instructional changes that were needed in order for learning outcomes to improve. And so another key aspect is that they were aligned with the existing government priorities and plans, and in some cases, maybe started out less aligned, and then saw that in order to really be effective at scale, they had to make some adjustments and work more in alignment with government priorities and government sectoral strategies. A really important thing is the role of the ministry personnel, the education system actors at the decentralized level. And we see that in terms of their role as kind of the intermediaries between the policies and the plans that get made at the central level and the action at the school level, right? So the way that the key role played by the part of the system that actually can touch schools, and that it comes through in terms of how they communicate program expectations. So if it's clear in terms of what instructional change is required or desired, then those decentralized players are key in terms of translating that into what teachers and school directors and families need to understand at the local level, and then to provide the support so that they can do it. Another key element was program and government monitoring. And monitoring serves 2 purposes, not just in terms of collecting data, and I'll speak to that in a little bit later, but also in terms of it reinforcing what the priorities are, right? If you're coming out and you're asking about, or you're trying to collect data on what's happening instructionally, that's very different than coming out and asking about administrative matters at the school level. So that also communicates a shift in priority in terms of what you're monitoring. And then, of course, a key element including capacity building and sort of the gradual transfer of of capacity and some of what the project supported to the government system systematically over the life of the program. I guess it's important to note that all of these programs were supported by an implementing partner, right? So an outside agency that was that played a key role in terms of providing the support to the system. Go ahead. So then to speak to some of the high-level findings across the programs, there were certain elements, the key eight elements that were found in at least 7 of the programs. So there was some commonalities across all of these programs. And you see 3 highlighted here: the use of data, and that's some of what I was referring to before in terms of monitoring data and making that much more tangible and much more of a currency of the system, right? So having that be available for folks to examine systematically and see what it tells them about the progress of implementation. Working with government, as I've mentioned, and then the programs taking on responsibility for distributing materials and for monitoring the extent to which some of the key elements of school support were or weren't taking place. And we can talk a bit about, and it'd be interesting to hear from everyone on sort of reflections on the extent to which the type of roles implementing partners play in sort of filling in some of that key capacity in the education systems. So if we look at a little more detail at these program elements, you can see here, I don't know to what extent this is readable. There we go, thank you. Look at that, it's magic. So you see that the blue dots represent the extent to which the program designs included each of these elements. And so you'll see that there are programs have staff in the regions was in all 8 programs. The programs invested in capacity building at the decentralized level, all 8 programs. They use monitoring data, all 8 programs. And then the magenta dots are for the 4 programs, as Bidini mentioned, that from which we were able to collect data just before the pandemic. And that you'll see in those were what those programs reported as being key to the success. And that's through interviews, both with program staff as well as with ministry counterparts and with the funding agency actors as well, what they all agreed were some of the key elements. And you see that the investment in capacity building at the decentralized level, all 4 of the ones for which we did collect data stress that as a key element of success. We can go ahead. But one last point I wanted to make there is that we saw there were a lot of different elements, and that some of what we take away from that is that there's more than one pathway to success. Although I would stress that there's different combinations of program elements that can contribute to success. Although I would argue that addressing that system capacity at the decentralized level is a requirement, right? So you can have a lot of other elements around that, but sort of making sure that you build the system capacity to actually improve the way it supports schools is key to achieving improvements and outcomes. So then here's some of the qualitative findings from some of the interviews. And you could see sort of some of the quotes here in terms of establishing a clear priority. You know, was a big shift, and I'm trying to, maybe this was 10, 12 years ago, where foundational learning and reading in particular became an important priority across many lower middle income countries, even in other countries here in the US, for example. And that having the data to tell that story about what are the existing levels of reading performance and therefore what's needed to improve them was key. You see that a quote there about expectations being set and communicated throughout the system, and that's one of the things that we definitely came away with as a strong contributing factor. It's you can have the policy priorities. You can state that you want to improve instruction as a clear priority. You can make that tangible in terms of the kinds of instructional changes and the kinds of materials teachers are expected to use. But then how you communicate that down the system repeatedly, and how you reinforce that through the kinds of data that you collect and use, is really what makes it tangible, right? So it's not just having vague statements about it, but it's actually translating that into what it means for actors throughout the system in order for that to be accomplished. And that's why the monitoring is key. As I said before, it gives you the data to tell you whether it's happening or not, but it also reinforces what those expectations are. And then the institutionalization is something that happens to varying degrees, and as we've collected data on the rest of the programs, we'll have a fuller picture of the extent to which there has been some success at institutionalizing some of these reforms and improvements. But it's, as we all know, it's sort of the biggest challenge of making these things sustainable parts of the education systems going forward. So coming to the implications, just a few points to make here. So this, obviously invest in building capacity of ministry staff, particularly at the decentralized levels. And the point I want to stress here is that we're not just talking about training. And what I think the programs did really successfully was provide the scaffolding that helped the system actors at those lower levels really see what were the critical aspects of their jobs that actually mattered for improving instruction at the school level. Often every system has a version of this, a district office or a sub-district office or its equivalent. And those staff in those offices usually have a whole bunch of different responsibilities, some of them administrative, some of them political at times. And helping the system see, of all those things that they're asking those people to do, which ones are the ones that really matter for improving instruction, and then providing the scaffolding to help them actually carry out those roles, visit schools, focus on what teachers are doing in the classroom, provide useful feedback to teachers, et cetera, and collect data about what's happening so the system can monitor the extent to which the instructional improvements are being implemented at scale. And that's obviously the link to a couple of these other implications in terms of consistently monitoring teacher practices, ministry counterparts involved in delivering and managing inputs. A lot of these programs played a key role, in whether it was in terms of materials distribution or provision of teacher training, but getting, and to varying degrees, involved ministry personnel directly or progressively sort of handed over the responsibility. So like in the program in Kenya, it basically led to overall reforms in how learning materials were procured and distributed to schools. With the project demonstrated how it could be done more efficiently at lower cost, and books getting to schools on time and in the right quantities. And then that led to reforms in how the ministry went about procuring and distributing materials. And then you can see the other ones that are out here in terms of transfer of responsibility and work with the ministry staff to establish the instructional changes as clear priorities in the system, which is a point I've been making throughout my section here. So one of the things that I want to end on in terms of the implications, a big takeaway for me from this research and our experience elsewhere, that getting a focus on instruction and learning outcomes really represents a big shift for a lot of education systems. And it's shifting the role of actors in the system away from one of sort of administering the kind of administrative compliance of the system to one of actually what's going to matter in terms of what teachers and students do on a day-to-day basis in schools. And that's kind of a core element of what we should be supporting education systems to do, is to make that shift and then to think about what that means tangibly in terms of the roles of different actors at different levels. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Joseph and Bidemi. And don't forget to pose your questions for Joe and Bidemi using the Q&A button. And they'll also be joining us live a little bit later on for some Q&A with the other speakers. I did just want to say, if some of you have been trying to tweet about today's session, I understand that Twitter may be down. I'd love to say that it's because our new Learning at Scale video broke the internet. But I think it might be a wider problem with Twitter, but do keep trying. We do really want to take that conversation on social media and share people's insights and amplify this work. So we are going to move now to a very short reflection from all of you about what you've heard so far. So I'm going to pause and give you the opportunity to comment on what you've heard from Joe and Bidemi. And share some reflections, perhaps some questions that you have at this stage. We're going to loop back to these reflections that you share a little bit later on. But I've got 3 minutes on the timer here. I'm going to invite you to use this link on the screen, bit.ly/brief3reflection, all lowercase. It should also be coming up in the chat, so you can follow that link. This will take you to a very short form where you can just share some reflections at this stage. So what reflections and questions arise for you as a result of hearing the key findings? I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock and give you the opportunity to share with us. Great. I hope everyone had the opportunity there to share some reflections with us. So thank you for that. For our next session, we are very pleased to introduce Rachel Jordan, who's the Programme Manager for the Learning at Scale study. So no one better placed to introduce our three programme speakers and lead us in questions and answers after their presentation. Rachel, over to you.
Thanks, Alice, and welcome back, everyone. I am thrilled to introduce today's panelists. Dr. Naim Sahil Butt worked as Chief of Party for the USAID-supported Pakistan Reading Project, which set out to improve the quality of reading in public and private schools in Pakistan. Dr. Sahil Butt has more than 30 years of experience working in education, including in project management, teaching, teacher training, research assessment, community mobilization and development, as well as in educational planning and organization development. Mr. Onesmus Kaminza is the Senior Education Policy Specialist for RTI's Tusome Early Grade Reading Activity. He previously worked in the Kenya Ministry of Education as Director of Policy and Partnerships. Mr. Kaminza is a trained teacher, a teacher trainer, and specialist in policy analysis and education evaluation. And lastly, Ms. Betty Mensabonsu is the Senior Reading Advisor for the USAID Partnership for Education Learning in Ghana. Her role is to provide technical and scientific leadership in implementing technical strategies with the goal of improving teaching and learning of reading. Ms. Mensabonsu has played key roles in the technical design, development, and implementation of early grade reading programming. This portfolio includes each of the 11 Ghanaian languages of instruction, the Transition to English program, and radio instruction through the National Reading Radio Program. And just as a reminder, please, as you're enjoying these presentations, post any questions that come to you in the Q&A function in your Zoom, because this will really help our discussions afterwards. And over to you, Dr. Sahil Butt.
Hi, my name is Naim Sohail. I worked as a Chief of Party for Pakistan Reading Project in Pakistan. So I'll be talking today on system support for effective large-scale reading for Pakistan Reading Project. This slide basically represents where we worked. We worked in 7 provinces and regions throughout Pakistan in 69 districts. Project was funded by USAID. It's about $150 million project. And the duration of the project was about 7 years. So Pakistan is quite a large country and has a very diverse background. And the most important thing is there is a devolved education system in Pakistan. So all the 7 provinces and regions are quite autonomous as far as the education is concerned. This is briefly sharing the targets and achievements of our program. Our student target was about 1.37 million students, and we reached about 1.7 million. 47% of those were girls. We trained about 27,000 teachers against 23,800 target. We distributed about 7.1 million copies of the material. That includes big books, scripted lesson plans, modules and manuals for teacher training, workbooks, flashcards, label cards, and some audios and videos of lesson plans and letter sounds. About 161 grants were awarded during the life of project to local NGOs and communities so they can try out some innovative ideas for the improvement of reading. About 55 policies were approved to support the reading program in all these 7 provinces and regions. In addition to that, we also worked with pre-service. 110 teacher training institutions were involved, sharing some of the success factors to strengthen the government system strengthening. The very basic and important thing we learned is knowledge of capacity constraints of the human resources and financial resources of the provinces of the government you're working with. Another important thing is respecting provincial priorities and contextual differences. As I shared earlier, geographically and demographically, Pakistan is very diverse. So slight changes in the program implementation design are very important to listen to them carefully and respect them. And that helps us in developing the ownership for our program. Another important part was working on creative solutions, working together as a team, particularly for the female participation. The northern side of Pakistan, where it's bordering with Afghanistan, female movement and access to education is comparatively little different. So we come up with some very innovative ideas to ensure the participation of our female teachers. For example, allowing them to bring their children in the training center, providing them a playroom in the teacher training centers, taking training as close as possible to their residences, and also allowing them to bring mail if it is required to the training centers. Another important thing is to propose solutions which are aligned to the existing system rather than creating a parallel system. And that helps in developing the ownership of the program and also in implementation. Another important aspect is experience and technically skilled project representation. It looks very basic, but it's very important. Countries like Pakistan in the government system, they have quite a lot of people who have got their degrees from renowned universities throughout the world. So if the people who are dealing with them are experienced and technically skilled, it helps to get that respect and ownership for the program. Another important aspect is open communication for setting realistic expectations. So when talking to them, they may have their own priorities, but be honest, open with them. And that's what we did. This is what basically the scope of the project is. That's what our limitations are. It takes a little while, but it helps in developing a relationship that helps in successfully running the program. Partnership and team building is one of the most important things for the success and sustainability of the project. Another important thing is capacity building efforts. The stakeholders involved must be involved in your training program. We'll be talking a little bit on the next slide. During the life of the project, we trained about 12,000 education officials working in Pakistani education system in different capacities. So when we say inclusive management or partnership, we really mean that involving them right from the very beginning, from the very start, when you're planning, when you're making work plans, and then implementation, and also in monitoring and evaluation and reporting, and trying to find the solution of the constraint and problems together. This basically open and inclusive discussions, collaboration, and accountability for results helped us a lot to make this project a success. It's very important to go for a holistic capacity building approach. For example, our program was for reading, and particularly for early grade reading, but we involved teachers, head teachers, communities, officials, assessment bodies, writers, publishers, training institutions. Almost every institution and person, individual who is involved somehow with education, early education in Pakistan, we involve them. And that helped us to bring not only understanding on the same page, but developing the ownership, which is important for the implementation and sustainability of the program. This is another important aspect, fostering ministry officials' understanding. As I talked a little bit earlier, they may have their own priorities. For example, when we started our program, most of the education officials, highest level at the provinces level or federal level or at the district level, they were more interested in, for example, classroom construction, science training, mathematics training. So sharing the research and how basically reading can help not only improve the reading of the student, but also in other subjects. So sharing evidence-based data helped us to develop that set of understanding for the program and ownership. As we shared earlier, ensuring respective government officials' involvement in the program. I talked about teachers and other people. But administrative people, for example, secretaries education, district education officials at the districts, secretaries at the provinces, director level people. So what we did, we formed the steering committees at the provincial level and at the district levels. And in these meetings, one of the most important thing is evidence-based decision making. So we developed the dashboard that was accessible to them. It was live, and the data was used in those steering committee meetings at provincial level or at the district level. And that helped us to take some decisions. And all these efforts actually helped us to institutionalize the activities, because head teachers were trained, they were part and parcel. Administration was involved in the program right from the beginning, during the implementation and reporting processes. that help us in institutionalizing the reading programs in the system. And I'll be talking a little bit more in the next slide on that one. So some of the sustainable strategies for our reading reforms include, for example, for in-service teacher training program, we supported the government in developing the reading standards very first time in Pakistan. They were developed, approved, and also incorporated into the curriculum. Then when we developed the reading learning material, we used the existing government people, and that developed a lot of ownership for the material developed by the PRP. And that helped us when they were doing the textbooks reviews. So these were the people who become our advocates. And a lot of Pakistan reading project material was integrated into these textbooks, which are being used throughout Pakistan now. Another important thing was reading instruction time. It was introduced and applied all over Pakistan, not only in our intervention districts. Then we helped them. All the provinces and regions are reviewing their continuous professional development programs and integrating reading training programs into that. And I'm very happy to share all the provinces and regions where we worked have that integrated, and they were being implemented. For example, in one of our province, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, in 2020, they trained about 30,000 teachers on reading. So that was quite a success, and it happened in some other provinces and regions too, like Gilgit-Baltistan, AJK, and quite a lot of foundations, NGOs who are running hundreds and thousands of schools adopted our program. In that case, we trained their master trainers and provided digital copies of our material, which they printed and used through their own resources. Teacher training education courses I talked earlier. We helped them in developing and reviewing the existing courses, and then also trained their faculty, and these are being used there now. This slide just shows you the outcomes of our program. So pleased to share that on average, as far as the oral reading fluency is concerned, we see about 13 correct word per minute improvement from baseline. And the 7 provinces and regions where we worked, out of these, 6 have shown more than 5 correct word per minute improvement. Sindh, Urdu, and Sindhi. Only 2 provinces are on the borderline or below that. Then at least 4 of the provinces show 10 correct word per minute improvement. And 2 of the provinces show quite a large gain, 15 correct word per minute. So that was a little story of Pakistan Reading Project. Thank you for listening. I'll be very pleased to answer the questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Onesimus Kiminza. Currently, I'm working as Senior Technical Policy Advisor of TUSOME. Previously, I worked with the government as a Director of Policy and Partnership. I wish to start by giving a background of TUSOME. TUSOME was based on a randomized control primary mathematics and reading initiative that was piloted in 6 counties in Kenya by RTI with financial support from USAID and alongside government. The primer study indicated that children who had gone through the intervention were twice as likely to read at the benchmark in both English and Kiswahili as the children who had not gone through the intervention. And based on these results, the government accepted to have all elements of primer implemented as TUSOME. When the TUSOME was then designed and approved by government as a program, it was launched by His Excellency, the President of Kenya in 2015. And I would wish to look at a few aspects in which the government of Kenya was supported by TUSOME to improve and strengthen their systems. One of the aspects that perhaps would be important was there was a need to revise the curriculum instructional support materials for Kiswahili and English to put them in line with the methodology of early grade literacy, which was eventually packaged as TUSOME. Government of Kenya accepted to have this done, and was able to coordinate the revision of the existing books then. And the books were revised by technical officers from the ministry, teachers drawn from schools and from teacher training colleges, and TUSOME staff. When they were revised then, they were produced and made available to schools at the ratio of 1:1. And the TUSOME program ran until the government of Kenya had to implement the new revised competence-based curriculum. When that happened, the books were aligned to the revised competence curriculum and with the support of government, of course. The books that were revised were very high quality, they were very cheap, and the government was impressed by the process of development and processing of the books. And with this then, the program ran until the 2020, when there was a need to monitor the implementation of TUSOME under the revised curriculum. And when this happened, a report came in, and there were recommendations that there was need to harmonize the English language activities, Kiswahili, and the literacy, and the government allowed that to happen, and that happened. And when the books were revised with the support of government, actually coordinated by government, then the government printed, procured, and made them available to Kenyan children at the ratio of 1:1, using the government budget in the year 2022. And in my view, then that is a very great government support. There was a challenge in this, however, in that when CBC, the new curriculum was implemented, the contact time for English and Kiswahili was reduced from 5 to 3 lessons. But the monetary report indicated that there was a need to enhance the contact time, and the government was very quick to revise the contact time for English and Kiswahili from 3 lessons to 5 in English and 3 in Kiswahili. The government also adopted the central procurement system for instructional materials, and this was borrowing heavily from the approach TUSOME used. And at the moment, the government of Kenya is using a central procurement system to provide books to schools. The other aspect that perhaps is important to mention is there was a need for continuous in-service training for teachers and curriculum support officers on the new TUSOME approach. And the government accepted and supported the timely training of teachers and curriculum support officers on the literacy program. This continued every term for the 5 years when TUSOME was running. The curriculum support officers were also provided with tablets, which they were using to support teachers, assess learners, give them feedback, upload the data onto the cloud, and the cloud would eventually translate to a national TUSOME dashboard, which was used by government for decision making. And this is something that we are transitioning to government at the moment. This, in my view, then was also a big step, because based on the revised materials and the in-service training of teachers, the government was able to accept to have all the training in the country be aligned to the approach TUSOME was using, and it adopted the approach, and the curriculum for teacher training college mainstreamed the TUSOME approach. So our graduates from teacher training colleges are coming out with the skills of early grade literacy, so there will be no need for further training when they come out from college, as long as they are deployed to teach in primary schools. And then graduates, of course, of the teacher training college then are being trained using the approach, and therefore, and everybody coming out from teacher training college as a teacher is coming out with those skills. The other aspect where TUSOME supported government very heavily was in the coordination and monitoring the evaluation, the implementation of TUSOME. And this one was done by government coming up with a coordination framework at 4 tiers, where there was a creation of a national steering committee, a national technical committee, a national technical team, and a coordination framework at the county. There was need to establish a coordination committee, and the coordination committee at the county then brought on board sub-counties, which are officers that had been trained in TUSOME to deliberate on educational aspects, including TUSOME. One advantage was that TUSOME managed to find its agenda found its way into the government county educational engagement. The challenge, however, was counties were not often used to development of work plans, but TUSOME team supported them to domesticate the national work plans into county work plans. And at the moment, all counties do their annual work plans and integrate TUSOME aspects into that coordination framework. The last bit that perhaps I would want to make reference to is building the capacity to support sustainability and transition of TUSOME and intervention. The government was able to establish TUSOME Sustainability and Coordination Committee that was comprised of departmental heads at the ministry, and then TUSOME technical teams participated in the meetings. And the National Transition and Coordination Committee would plan on aspects that need to be maintained and transitioned to government. And this is something that has been going on with quarterly meetings, and the committees would discuss aspects that have come from the ground through the National Technical Committee and give guidance to what would be implemented at the departmental level. One challenge with this was it took a bit of time before government was able to appropriate a budget for TUSOME, and the departmental heads who are members of the Transition and Sustainability Committee were assigned roles and responsibilities, and they were able to pick them, mainstream them in their work plans and their annual budget. At the moment, government has a budget for early grade literacy, which is packaged as TUSOME, and this is where government drew them resources to provide the instructional support materials. Basically, those are some of the aspects that I thought are important for us to share, and the strongest components of TUSOME systems support that has been encountered or has been implemented in the Kenyan context. Thank you.
Hello to you all joining the Learning at Scale today. My name is Betty Mensah-Bonsu from the Learning Project in Ghana. I'm the Senior Reading Advisor, and I'll be focusing on training and capacity building and how monitoring has made the program successful. So the outline quickly is, as I've said, looking at capacity building efforts and the gradual transfer of responsibility, and also looking at monitoring and how the enforcement has improved teaching and learning outcomes as priority of the system. And then I'll look at sustainability of the capacity building efforts and some challenges we faced along the way, and then any questions and answers at the end. So looking at the capacity building, to make the program really successful, I think we had to introduce the whole concept of the phonics-based approach to reading. And to do that, we need people in the system to really support us to do this. I think to make the program really successful, we really had to look at what the system has and how we can leverage on the system to really ensure that this program takes off successfully. So to do that, I think we looked at the literacy program in the system, and we identified some literacy experts who are already trained and operating. We selected them based on a literacy expert background. So we looked at the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, National Teaching Council, National Inspectorate Board. And then we realized there's a lot of people in the system who have strong background in literacy. These people are already working in the system, they're getting paid by the system. So it was really easy to really gather these people. All we did was to pay them a little transport and traveling allowance to ensure that they're able to move around the system. We identified 120 national core trainers, and then also the district support training teams. We had about 800 of them. The national core trainers went through a series of trainings, initially very intensive 12 days on the phonics-based approach to reading, And then they had termly refresher trainings to build a strong knowledge and understanding of the phonics-based approach to reading. After that, they were in a stronger position to really drill down into schools to train the teachers. These people, as I've said already, are already paid by the system. Otherwise, this wouldn't have been possible because it means we have to pay a lot of money to external people to do the training. But all we had to do was to pay travel and transport allowance. If we look at the monitoring also, I think it was exactly the same. We build on existing capacity in the Ministry of Education. They also had people, the IT team, they have the Education Management Information System, the MES officers, and then the School Improvement Support officers, who are also already being paid by the system. So all we did was to add on some traveling and transport allowance for them to be able to move around. The capacity was enhanced because they had already capacity to do some monitoring in the system, and they would have gone out anyway. So our little support ensured that the work was done effectively. And what we trained them on was on how to collect data and use the data for decision making using fidelity of implementation data systems that learning developed. So if you look at the sustainability of these efforts at the regional, district, and the national level, there was a monthly dashboard review meetings by the district directors. They are the strongest advocates for the learning program. They have the power, the district directors have got the power to organize the districts at the school level, at the training level. So their support really was really useful to ensure that things were happening at the district and the school level. And when the monitors go and collect the data, they used to have monthly review meetings where they look at where the challenges are coming up in the schools, and then straight away they deploy officers to go and see how best they can solve the issues at the ground. So example, if there are no teachers at the school, there are issues of absenteeism, they send officers down to really find out what they can do to support. And then they also have quarterly monitoring visits to the school based on the same results. So we support them with a little fuel coupons, and then they go around the schools to really also get to know what's happening at the schools and then support them at the district level as much as they can. We also have the regular refresher training for the national core trainers, the district teacher support team, head teachers, and then our CISOs also get refresher training to really also go into the schools and collect data and support school level activities. We have the Literacy Advisory Committee that provides oversight over all the activities that happens in the program. And they are mostly national ministry level actors, and they also take interest, and they have provided the backbone for all the national level activities that we do. They have strong buy-in. They give us all the support we need. So for example, if we have issues with timetabling in the schools, we follow them and they discuss it at the national level and then bring solutions to us to implement at the district and the school levels. We have quarterly meetings, 16 regional directors, 260 district directors to discuss emerging issues based on the monitoring. So monitoring is very critical, and they support us to really look at issues coming and how we can all work together to ensure that the program implementation is going on as expected. Now we have intensive school support visits, which also is derived from the dashboard. So after data is collected, we look at those schools that are really struggling. Then we deploy the national core trainers and the district support training teams who already have the content knowledge and who train the teachers to really go down into the schools to find out what's happening in the school, to provide them one-on-one support. So with some of the challenges, as I said before, there's very strong commitment and ownership at the district level, which is a plus. without the support of the district level team members, we would have struggled at the school level. So there's a strong ownership there. At the national level, our program compete with other equally important activities. However, as I said, we have the steering committee and at the advisory committee who comprises of people from the national, and they also provide support at the national level when we have challenges. And then also one of the challenges we faced was the fact that we always had issues with conflicting timelines when it comes to implementation. So for example, if it comes to data collection, sometimes you find out that the CISO is also equally engaged in other things. So data collection becomes very difficult. So what we've done is we sit down and plan activities, ensure that everything we're doing aligns with the activities that the districts have on the timetable, so that activities really flow easily and successfully. So this is the end of the presentation. I would just like to say thank you. And if there are any questions, I'm ready to answer.
All right, thank you so much, Betty, and welcome back. Thanks so much to our panelists for those enlightening presentations. And I would like to request that all of our panelists and presenters come back on video, please, and come off. Well, you can stay on mute for now. Thanks so much. To kick off the Q&A, I'd like to invite our report authors, Joe and Bidemi, back to ask the first question to our panelists.
Bidemi, did you have a question? I have a burning question.
Yes, I have one that I would like to ask as well. So, and thanks to all of the panelists for the videos. They were all really great. One question that I had, so a lot of these programs had lots of different things that they did, from teaching and learning materials to training teachers, et cetera, et cetera. And governments, in thinking about what they wanted to keep on, didn't always sort of made some decisions about what they wanted to sustain or what they wanted to carry on with. And I was wondering whether you could speak to how those decisions were made in each of these projects. Joe, over to you. Oh, unless, how do you want to do it? Question, answer, or?
Let's have everyone chime in and answer
Okay.
that first, if that's okay, and then we'll have Joe take over.
Okay, I think I will start. We've come to a point where the government has actually applied to USAID to really support them to print the materials and distribute to all early grade schools in Ghana. And we are in the process of printing, which I think is a good deal. It is a big thing. Initially, we thought, well, it's something we've always dreamt about, that if our materials get to all the schools in Ghana, I think it will make a big difference in their education in Ghana. And we've gotten there. So for the program to be sustained, I think, thankfully, we have all the books, or we are going to have all the books in the Ghanaian education system. And that will ensure that the program goes on for a long time to come. So thank you.
Thank you. If I may, in PRP Pakistan Reading Project, actually, when we started developing the material, right from the very beginning, we involved government officials. Like, for example, subject specialists from curriculum boards, from textbook boards, experienced teachers and subject specialists. So they were trained, and the material was developed involving them. So that gave us an opportunity not only to develop the material, but also develop the necessary ownership within the government system. So once these materials were developed, later at a stage in PRP, government decided to review the curriculum and the textbooks. So that was an opportunity for us, and all the people involved for early grade reading work, as we use them as authors in our material development. So they were basically responsible for doing that job. So they became our advocates. And it helped us to convince government and integrate the, for example, reading standards and all the important ingredients of the reading into the curriculum. And that leads to the textbook review. So when it comes to the textbook review, so we supported them. And again, those people with whom we worked during the material development, they were very helpful and played a pivotal role. So I'm very happy to share that all the textbooks for the early grade level, particularly for primary level, grade 1 and grade 2, our material was integrated. And these books are being used by millions of students in Pakistan. So that helped us in ensuring the sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps I could be the next one. In the Kenyan context, when we were designing the Tusome project, in the design, we entrenched transition. And by the time we were designing the project, it was anticipated that the curriculum was due for reform. So between Tusome and government, it was agreed that we would be able to mainstream the elements of early grade literacy into the primary early grade curriculum that was under review. So when the curriculum was reviewed in 2018, the new curriculum that was rolled out had the early grade literacy, English and Kiswahili instructional materials as course books, and therefore they were bound to be taken up by government. And at the same time, on the teacher training, then during the design, it was agreed that the Tusome would be transitioning progressively to government, and therefore the national teacher training colleges picked up the approach, integrated it into their revised curriculum, and the teacher trainees then were being given the skills. And therefore, in 2020, when the government revised the new materials, they had already a budget for instructional materials, and they actually picked up the budget and were able to procure and distribute materials to all the Kenyan children in primary grades 1, 2, and 3, and this about 3 million children across all our public primary schools across the country. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Joe, do you have a follow-up?
I know there's only a couple of minutes left, so if you wanted to give a chance for a question from the participants, I'd bite my tongue for once.
I appreciate the generosity. I think we're actually okay. We have about 19 minutes left, so please go ahead, and then we'll turn over to some participant questions.
Okay, I was misreading the time. Anyway, thanks. And thanks to the 3 colleagues who presented on their projects. It was excellent, really, really helpful. So I want to zero in on one fairly specific aspect and would like to hear in very specific terms, what was one thing or some of the aspect of the role of the decentralized actors in the system that changed as a result of the project? What was a key difference in what the expectation was for whether it's a district or a sub-district level, a CSO in Kenya, or the equivalent in Ghana at the district level, or in the decentralized level in Pakistan? What was an element of their job that actually changed and that you feel like made a difference in terms of the support they provided to schools?
Perhaps I could take it. In the Kenyan context, one thing that changed greatly was the teacher support by curriculum support officers. Initially, in the Kenyan context, while curriculum support officers were supporting teachers, they were not well facilitated really to be able to pick it, support them, give them feedback, and share the feedback at the national levels. So TUSOME trained curriculum support officers on the early grade literacy, provided the curriculum support officers with the tablets. And when they use the tablets to support teachers, of course, we digitized the instructional materials and put them in the tablets. So when a teacher walked to a school, they worked with a tablet that had the instructional materials and the assessment toolkit. When they finished the assessment, I mean the teacher support, they were able to pick randomly some learners, assess them, and then upload the information on the dashboard. They would give the teacher immediate feedback on what they have done and perhaps agree on the next visit. And then the information was shared in the dashboard on how many regions were supported, how many teachers were supported, what was the literacy levels across the county and across the country, and at both the county, the sub-county, and national level, decision will be made on what kind of support will be required depending on the challenges that were being reflected in the dashboard through teacher support. And in my view, this was the biggest challenge TUSOME ever had in supporting government. Thank you.
Okay, I will come in, sorry. I think it's very similar to what TUSOME does. We had the school improvement support officers who used to be like school inspectors. So the moment they go into schools, everybody starts panicking. But we train them as coaches. So you're not in the school to criticize somebody. You are there to provide support. At the same time, they are the people who collect the data that goes onto the dashboard. So you go in, sit in the lesson, observe the lesson, go through all the steps on the dashboard, whether the teacher is following the steps, whether they are on target, where they're involving boys and girls equally. There's a whole thing they need to go through. After that, you go through, they go through the whole coaching cycle. So they meet and then decide on areas the teacher needs support. The CISO then goes through the whole lesson observation. After that, they give the feedback and then set targets for the next visits. So the difference here is that they don't go in as the inspectors of schools, but they go in as friendly faces who go into the school to support. And I think that has made a lot of difference. Teachers are not scared when the CISO is coming now. So more welcoming faces in the schools, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Betty. Naeem, is that similar for Pakistan as well?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much similar as far as the teaching support is concerned and dashboards. But I think I would like to just add a few more things very quickly. One thing which helped us a lot is basically constituting the steering committees at the highest level. And these were the committees where decisions were taken, for example, and it all was data driven, using the same dashboard as colleagues were. Another important aspect for us was basically, I think, team building and ownership, and taking the government officials, even at the very highest level, like, for example, administrative colleagues, secretaries who are the decision maker, to the school. So seeing is believing, so they can see the change themselves. And that brought a lot of ownership for our program when they visited our schools. And we invited them just to have their visited on their own. We just facilitated them, not the project team is not with them. So when they see the things themselves, that really made the difference for us. And the last thing I would like to add, integrating the reading standards and ingredients into the curriculum and reviewing of textbook codes. And plus the continuous professional development programs, which these provinces and national level colleagues have, reviewing them and integrating the reading program in that, and during the project life, ensuring that some pilot programs are being implemented so we can provide the necessary support to them. So these are, I think, some of the things which helped us.
Great, thanks. I think it's interesting, Naeem, your point about having the leadership, like see and understand, and then therefore buy in even more concretely to what was trying to be achieved, and sort of trying to see that connection between you need the leadership and they need to be making the public statements and making decisions about where resources get allocated that support the idea of what we're trying to do, which is improve instruction and learning outcomes. But then it takes those actors at the lower level of the system interacting with schools in new and different ways, as Betty and Kaminza described, right? That actually makes the change tangible. And you know, in the chat, there were some comments and questions about, oh, isn't some of this obvious? Yes, but it's putting that effort in place in the way Kaminza and Betty were describing it, and Naeem, you've also described in your presentation, that actually gets it to happen, right? Like that, give them the tools, the training, so that somebody who used to visit a school and be an inspector and everybody was nervous, then becomes a coach, and understanding that shift in emphasis and how that gets translated into action at the lower level. I think that to me feels like a really key element. And I know in the other programs, the 4 additional that we've looked at, that also comes out strongly as a key contributor to success. Thanks.
Joe, thanks so much. And I'm glad you raised that sort of debate in or discussion in the Q&A about the obviousness of some of the high-level findings of system support. So thank you for kind of tackling the decentralized level inputs. I want to build on that a little bit. Luis Crouch and another panelist or another participant, as well as a number of others, have raised this question of, you know, we appreciate these system supports, but if these are true, then why is it not happening everywhere? And is it just a matter of realizing the intensity that is needed? And so, you know, each of you has extensive experience in the education sector and working with systems. So, you know, in your experience, what was different about the approaches under these 3 programs?
May? So I think my colleague is, some of the colleagues who raised that question is right. I'm not sure what's the right answer for all that, because some places things works and some places it doesn't. And there could be many variables which can contribute to that. I'm sure all the colleagues who work in these projects, they work hard and try their best. But I think some of the things which are very important, as one of the colleagues shared about the school visit, respect. I think one of the most important thing is basically ensuring the respect for the stakeholders, for the government officials, making them realize that you are not the one who is bringing the new things or trying to teach them something new, and they're doing everything wrong. I think this is the attitude which helps a lot. This is one important thing. Second thing is, I think, respecting. For example, in Pakistan, when we worked, it was quite a large project by all means, as far as the trainings are concerned, about $150 million project. So we were working in 7 provinces and regions. In Pakistan, education is devolved. So as I talked about in my presentation too, respecting the local needs and be ready to listen to them and trying to find out the solutions collectively rather than imposing. And the last thing I think I would like to share, which I found very useful and my team too, and it's probably the most important thing, aligning your program within the existing program rather than exposing a new thing or creating a new structure. If you're successful in convincing them that it is to support them, what they are doing, and trying to come up with solutions which are within their structure and within their system, either human resources or financial resources, I think that may be a key to the success. Thanks.
Perhaps I could also chip in and allow me to point one thing out, that provision of evidence to government is a very crucial thing. Like when TUSOME provided evidence to government that there were low learning outcomes at lower primary, and TUSOME had tried interventions that were working, and there were results to that, and children had started learning, and the learning outcomes were different, and the results could be seen in the randomized control trial, then the government was quick to find out how is it that then we can support every other child. And this was enough evidence to make the government interested in looking at these solutions and finding out how it can benefit everybody. For example, in 2015, when TUSOME was being rolled out, I don't think the donor had enough resources to roll it out nationally. But because government felt this was a very important intervention, politically, it would not make sense for it to be implemented in a few counties, and government was ready to implement it across the country to all regions in support with the development partners who are supporting the program. So in my view, when we provide evidence and real evidence, then the government gets very convinced and they are quick to want to work with the organization to see how things can work differently. And this is what happened in the Kenyan context. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think we have time for at least one more question. So I wanted to raise this question from Lisa Easterbrooks. She asks, the financial support needed to make these changes and implement well is a huge challenge without donor funding. What financing is needed to do this well in more places? How can we work at the policy level to ensure these types of reforms are financed at the needed levels to support implementation and management at all levels? So a really simple question. And I want to open this to presenter and panelists. Thanks.
Sure, I'll jump in initially on that, and I think it's the right question to ask, and some of the way you ask it sort of hints at to me what is part of the answer. In that, obviously, systems need infusions of resources. If what we're trying to do is change the status quo ante, right, to sort of move it off of its existing level of operation and functioning where it's not producing the desired level of learning outcomes. So there's an infusion of resources that are needed. And so that can take a variety of forms, right? And so, you know, we have in the universe of the assistance programs out there, you have like one end of the spectrum, which is just like, okay, here's some money, budgetary support or a large infusion of resources. And then another end of the spectrum, which is like, okay, we're going to do a little enclave project over here and have an international NGO or local NGO like run something completely separate from the system, right? Sort of fill a vacuum someplace in the system. And, you know, neither of those really do what's needed in terms of, the resources from the one end is good, but what's missing is the sort of the support the system needs to translate those resources into action at the different levels. And I think the examples that were given today are really demonstrate that you need to invest in that kind of technical support or accompaniment, I think, and that's the word they like to use in Senegal. The accompaniment that the system needs to sort of change from pre-existing ways of doing things, inspecting schools, being administrators of the status quo, to being supporters of change and helping teachers understand concretely what that means for them on a day-to-day basis. And even simple things, when you think about it, the places where systems struggle, like, do the materials get to school like before the start of school? Right? Do the teachers have them in their hands when they're going to training? So they're learning, in the training, they're learning how to use the materials, not just being talked to about it, right? So some of those sort of small concrete ways that the system needs support to do it differently, right? Get the materials there on time, get the training and the materials aligned, and then the support that helps the teachers actually apply the training and what they do in their classroom. So that kind of investment, and maybe there's some work to be done in thinking about, what actually that is, right? And what the financing requirements are for that, in addition to the infusion of resources that's needed to cover some of the additional requirements that the system is trying to address. That's sort of my answer to that.
That's great. Thanks, Joe. I wonder if anyone else has anything to add.
Yeah, I would just like to. Okay.
Yes, I thought perhaps I could say something before Nam does it. And I was saying, most governments have have the resources, and perhaps what's missing out is prioritization and exactly reorganizing the resources to be targeted appropriately. So in my view, if governments are aware, and perhaps like in the Kenyan context where the pricing of materials were reduced by close to 60%, and the government could see really this makes sense, and the government was able to adopt that structure to procure materials for other levels and other grades using their resources. So perhaps governments needs to be shown evidence of what works well and how does it work. And it's possible the resources within the governments can be utilized before resources can be infused from around the other development partners. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to add a few cents there. In my humble opinion, I think for this particular aspect, financing, there are two sides of that. One is the government, but we hardly talk about the donors. So one very important thing is basically if something is successful and it worked well, so it's not abandoned by the donors altogether. So there should be some sort of advocacy at the donor level. For example, this particular study, large-scale study, is another very good example of that. So that can be shared. Why try new things when you have successful models with you, and convince them to continue that support. Second thing is, for example, in Pakistan, it's quite a large country, more than 220 million people and millions of students. Of course, we couldn't reach everybody during the course of this project, though it was one of the largest. But for example, most of the cost which was spent, it went on, for example, quite a lot of money went into material development. It was not easy. It was quite lengthy process and it was costly. Second thing is, training about 12,000 officials the Pakistan government has now. So, for example, if the donor continue these sort of project with probably 1/3 of the money which they have spent on Pakistan Reading Project, it could have a far-reaching effect, and it will help in not only in sustainability but institutionalizing the idea. Another important which USAID at least tried for Pakistan, and that helped us a lot. Before even starting the project, they made a baseline, and as my colleagues shared, evidence and data is very important. They have their own priorities, but if somebody can convince them that it's really a door, if students can read better at early grade, they will not only perform in their languages, but also it will help them to improve in other subjects too. So sharing evidence, sharing research with the people so they can understand how and why reading is important and how it can help them in achieving their targets and their goals as far as the learning outcomes are concerned, not only in the reading or language, but also some other subjects too. So I think some of these things may help. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Naeem. Betty, did you have anything that you wanted to add on the financing piece?
The finance side is a challenge because the program competes with other equally important activities at the moment. But what we've done is to scale back. When we started at the beginning, I think we were looking at rewarding the trainers and officers some money to really encourage them to do, but we scaled back. We want it to be, for the system to be able to carry on. So it is just a little top up of what you get normally. So even if we're not there, the FOI system is there, and we don't have it on tablets anymore. It's on their phones. So anybody can access it as long as you've got data. So at the national level, regional level, district level, even the head teachers sometimes have got access. We share the link of the results. They know the results. So those districts that are really committed, you know those people who want to make it work, who have seen the benefits of it, who have seen their children reading, the excitement in their parents and everyone. And it is not about the money anymore. When you get to that point, it's not about the money. It's about what can I do? And sometimes you see evidence of some directors just doing whatever they can to ensure it goes on. So I think, as has been said, Naeem said, the moment stakeholders really appreciate what we're doing, it turns out to be, what can I do what sacrifice can I do to make it work, rather than what can I get before I can get it. So we're slowly seeing the shift in some areas where people really appreciate what we're doing. So hopefully it will rub off on the others and they can continue, without really demanding much in terms of money. For the materials, as I said, luckily we've gotten USAID support to print the materials for over 15,000 schools. We have trainers in the system who can train all the other teachers who are coming on board. So hopefully the districts will organize their own trainings. I think we did that recently, and really deploy the district teacher support team that we have trained to really train the new teachers in the system. So hopefully it wouldn't be a matter of, if there's no money, we're not going. But let's all do it because this works. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Betty. Thank you, Naeem. Thank you, Onesmus, Bidemi, and Joe. I'll invite you. There's a lot of questions left in the chat. My apologies to Benny Mwanga. We wanted to answer yours live. You had a great question about data and monitoring, but we're out of time. So thank you again to our panelists. That was wonderful. And let me hand back over to Alice.
Thanks so much, Rachel, and thanks to all of our speakers for sharing their insights and experiences. Melinda commented in the chat earlier that learning at scale scratches an itch. And I think this conversation may only be scratching the surface, because I think we could have gone on even longer today, but hopefully it's whetted your appetite enough to encourage you to dive into those briefs and the research study. Now, we asked you a little bit earlier in the session to share your reflections with us, and I've asked Joe and Bidemi just to take a quick look at some of those reflections and share one or two comments. I'll look to Joe and Bidemi to see if they've had a chance to look at those reflections. If not, I can filibuster, I'm sure, and give you a moment or two, but are you okay to say a couple of words or a few points that might be interesting to share that you read there? Would you like a couple of minutes?
I'm trying to find my way to where they are. Sorry.
That's okay. Well, they're in your inbox. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. And perhaps while I do that, I'm just going to do a quick move ahead, if I may, to our evaluation form for today's session, and just share the link and give people the opportunity to open the evaluation form while Joe and Bidemi are just opening up those reflections. So if you may, please do follow the link here, bit.ly/brief3webinar, and it's going to come up in the chat as well. We really value and act on the feedback that we get on these webinar sessions. So be really sort of frank and open, share how we can improve, share what you liked. We really do value that feedback. So I'm just going to give you a moment to follow that link and start to complete that evaluation form just while our speakers are gathering their final thoughts. So 30 seconds to open that form. Don't go anywhere. We've still got speakers to come, but please do share your thoughts. Hopefully that's given everyone enough time to follow the evaluation form. But yes, please, Joe, do share any initial thoughts that you have, and then we'll move over for our closing remarks.
Sure. And thanks to those who bothered to put these in here. They're really interesting reflections, and a lot of the same reflections I think that we've been having throughout the course of this study. There's one thing in here that I wanted to respond to, and that asks about the focus on reading, on learning outcomes. And so what I think that's definitely a key element of it. And I think if you think about how the wheel has turned in our field over the last perhaps 15 years, that we started to really help systems focus more on learning outcomes by having data on whether, for example, children are learning to read in their first few grades of primary school or not. And that has really made a shift. But a key thing is not just, the learning outcome, are children learning to read or not, or perhaps do math or other outcomes that we want to see, but what does it take for that to happen, right? So creating a clear outcome intention in terms of the learning, but also in terms of the instructional practice, the materials that need to be present, and the support that the schools and teachers need in order to use that effectively, to implement it effectively in their classroom, right? So it's one thing to track the outcomes, but it's what we're seeing from some of the dashboards and kinds of things that were given as examples today is that we're also tracking the extent to which the other things are happening. Is the instructional change taking place? Do the teachers have the materials? Are they using them appropriately in their classroom? Are they progressing through the curriculum? Because that's what's going to tell us whether we're going to get the outcomes or not, right? So I think that fuller picture is a key piece of it. So we saw the shift away from even having no data on whether children were learning or not, to having data and then understanding what we need to see happening in the systems in order to see those learning outcomes improve. That to me is kind of a key shift that's happened, and that these 8 programs demonstrate well.
Brilliant, thanks, Joe. Bidemi, anything from you just before we close?
Yeah, maybe just briefly. I mean, I think a lot of the things have been discussed in the last session, but one of the questions that I think spoke to me was one around, how do you get government staff who are usually sort of overburdened with lots of different things to do to actually take on some of these additional roles that we're talking about. And I think this is something that, we all face in some of these projects and other projects that we've worked in, that we, sometimes the ratio of these curriculum support staff to schools are actually quite high. And part of what we see projects trying to do in addressing that, that was the question, was one, letting the data, first of all, letting the data work for you. So taking the data and using that to say, well, what are the schools that are struggling? And maybe that's where we should sort of prioritize our visits. Also looking at which schools haven't been visited in a long time and working with district people to be able to have the data, use the data to help them make decisions about where to prioritize their support. I think also we see some projects also moving towards a more system of school-based support to supplement the support from external coaches. So also working with head teachers and other senior teachers within the schools who might act as peer support or coaches. So these are some of the strategies, while also working at the policy level to really work on job descriptions and making sure in job descriptions the priority is on the teacher support side of their roles. So these are some of the things that we've seen projects doing in terms of addressing some of that.
Great. Thanks so much, Bidemi. Thank you, Joe. And thanks to everyone who's joined us throughout the last few months in this webinar series. Do continue to follow the study, share your thoughts online using the hashtag Learning at Scale, and do follow RTI International for updates as well on social media. I'm really delighted to close out our series and our webinar today with a few remarks from Dr. Asya Kazmi, OBE, I can say now, recently awarded for her services to education. So a really fitting end to our series. Asya, over to you for some closing remarks.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you didn't come to me about 5 minutes ago, because I was actually very emotionally moved by following what's been written in the text, the questions and the presentation. And I think it was Bidemi's comment about what's happening is there's a shift of norms of what we can expect from our children in early grades. That is massive, and actually it does move me. So I was wondering, what do I say after these experts who have spoken in detail and such commitment and passion, who actually walked the walk, can I say after them? So I'm going to try, as a funder, I don't think I can much, but I'm going to try from the perspective of having been an inspector, a coach, and more importantly, a teacher. The Learning at Scale study is like a multi-layered cake. We heard about and getting more and more detail about what's happening. So the first one started with instructional practices. What does effective instructional practice look like in programs that are shifting learning at scale? Then the second one was about the support that is needed to teachers to help them shift their instructional practices and improve them. And we all need support. And the third one was today about the system support that is required to deliver this at scale. And the 5 priorities about having a priority on instructional change informed by a good understanding of what teaching and effective teaching and learning looks like and a vision for this, supporting and aligning with existing government plans, and really importantly, looking at the middle layer and skilling them up and empowering them. That's where the magic happens. And I know because I was one of those middle layer district colleagues. And then the importance of the mechanism, this monitoring mechanism that is focused on, are our children learning? Are we doing the things right with the adults that are actually impacting on learning? And finally, ensuring that there's a transferability from perhaps large donor-funded programs to actual government implementation and sustainability. So from the 3 people today, the 3 words that stuck out for me was evidence from Onesimus about giving government the chance to celebrate success and having that as a preview of success through evidence that this has worked. So that striking evidence of twice as likely to hit reading benchmarks if you were in the primer, and 60% reduction in costs. The second aspect about respect and support that Naeem spoke about is involving government staff and local experts in designing materials, in doing the reviews, etc. And from Betty about the support needed, the expertise that's already in the system, and making sure that there's support to the teachers as opposed to the inspectoral scaring of teachers. I'll take the liberty of adding a third about making it as easy as possible for teachers to take up new practices and keeping it simple. So I genuinely found this not just informative. I want to go back and watch it again and read all the comments in the chat, but I found it inspiring and compelling. Inspiring because there's a focus on positive deviances, and those positive deviances are in the real world with facing real resource challenges, but real implementation expertise being developed. And compelling because there's nothing as exciting as a solvable problem. And what we're hearing from these partners is how this problem is solvable. I'm really grateful to the RTI team for this research. I know personally through questions asked of us how eagerly it's been awaited and know it's being used. And thank you to them for making it attractive, and these webinars and discussions help us to dig into the detail. And I'm really looking forward to the numeracy one coming soon. But importantly, I'm grateful to each of those 8 programs working in Senegal, Ghana, Nigeria, Tanzania, Kenya, Pakistan, and India for being open to scrutiny, for sharing your expertise with us, for striving for excellence. We need a little bit more on cost information, but also for helping us to uncover the critical factors and injecting optimism into the sector that we can shift learning outcomes. Word of caution, we have a long way to go. The pandemic has meant this work is now even more important than it was before. We know now there's estimated 7 out of 10 children will not be able to read by the age of 10 in LMIC. But what you have told us is that this work has impact. We need to continue doing this where it's being done, and we need to bring more on where it's not being done. But what you've showed us is yes, we can. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Asia. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm going to play some music to see you all out.